If
It's
at any
perfectly
point
useless.
you all have questions or whatever, you just want to point something out, I don't mind. Speak up. Um, so the comp. The comp is there's two variants. I'm gonna go over the good variant because we're a bunch of gamers. And this isn't the exact positioning they would take. I'm just gonna throw them about and then move them accordingly. So no real names for this comp. I've heard protect the McCree, protect the president, protect the VIP, Cree comp, just counter dive. There's a ton of names for this. Um, General gist is tanks dive, or at least with the dive tanks variant, which I believe is the better variant. They dive, control space, force mistakes from. Let me see if I can get the draw. Oh my god, I haven't done this in so long. Here we go. They hold space, force bad dives. When those bad dives get taken, the support slash DPS lineup just rolls. And the tanks can counter dive as well. Um, Clear. There's also a Ryan Zarya version, but it doesn't really make much sense because at that point it just gets rolled by goats. Because at that point it's just a worse goats. So comps that this comp are bad against. It's kind of obvious. Goats, the fun one. It's not great because you're never gonna win that frontline duel. Monkey Diva, the only time that Monkey is ever able to win that frontline duel in Goats is on dive Goats on very certain maps. And even then, you're not really taking frontline fights most often. Then you're usually taking backline fights. Um, so even if you're able to control that space for a while with Monkey Diva, McCree isn't going to be able to take advantage of it at all like you would be able to with an aggressive Zarya. So controlling that space is going to be useless, and after a while, your front line is just going to get rolled. McCree's not going to be able to do anything on his own, so as they push through, or not on his own, but he's not going to be able to take advantage of the GOAT's comp. They're just going to have all these shields, Matrix, he's going to get jumped on, and then even if he's not getting killed, it's going to be a 6v4 at that point and you've just lost. So the comp that this is most ran against is typical dive. And when you look at it that way, it's really, really obvious. So what the comp would play here, this is kind of disorganized. They're running dive, typical dive. We'll say Genji Tracer. Actually, more meta one is Pharah Sombra. That's the more meta one.
We're all slaves to the meta.
Yeah.
And then comp would be Lucio Ana usually. Or if not Lucio Ana, Lucio something. It's sometimes Lucio Zen. But the general premise is tanks are here to contest space. The thing is, if your tanks play in just a counter dive fashion, like they're playing up here and then you're just waiting for their team to push into yours and then your tanks are going to counter dive. What that does is it gives up this entire space here. And if the
You're
enemy
taking
team
no space.
yeah, if the enemy team is smart, they see, okay, these guys are kind of bad. They run back to spawn, pull out a Widow, they set up right here, and then they've got sightlines everywhere. So, and this is a thing that I've been teaching 4.4k Winstons, that they still have to take space, even in counter dive. So you want to end up still contesting the space. You're going to be getting support. It's not going to be like a ton of support, but that's why you're not going to be like taking heavy fights. Like you're not diving into the back line. You're not up here brawling your brains out. You're just kind of giving enough time. Like you're giving up space, but not a ton of space. Whereas you're giving up this much, where you could be giving up this much. So you're contesting space without going too overly aggro. And then what you're trying to do is you're trying to force the enemy team of, okay, well, their Zen is alone in the back line, so oh my god, I really hate how this window pops up. So we're gonna dive into them, and then when that happens, they end up diving into your entire team, and then that's when your tanks can dive
Yeah.
back as well. So it's really
So
strong. Oh yeah, go ahead.
you're basically taking like soft dives rather than hard engages because you
Yeah,
just have the
exactly.
two like dive tanks and
So
dive DPS to go with them.
you wouldn't want to like use your god. You wouldn't want to like use your leap to engage here, but you would be
Hmm.
taking like up here, dropping down, just fighting this for as long as possible. And then if that monkey is just poking at you the whole time, like he's not committing to a dive, that's when your Zen Discord, your McCree spam,
Yeah.
that's when they take advantage of that. If you are able to force the dive, I it's gonna be really hard to survive like this
Yeah.
death trap over here. I don't see a lot of comps surviving that. So that's kind of the general premise of the comp is okay, we know it's bad against goats, but we've gone this comp to force the enemy team on to dive. So now we either go goats, which is kind of the smarter thing to do. But as meta changes, this may become more prevalent, and it'll be okay. Now this is where we go on to protect the president or whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
Um, so comps that this does work against, it works against Sombra Farah. Sombra's going to have a really hard time getting hacks off onto any of these targets, and even if she is able to get a hack off onto them, you're not going to be able to follow up on it easily. Like, if you hack a Brigida and then go for the dive, all that's going to happen is Brigida's going to get pocketed by the two healers, and then McCree is going to melt you. So there's no real value from hacking anyone over here. So she's going to want to be looking for hacks on tanks here, and then to quickly whirl onto those tanks. So that's why you're preparing for it. You're not going for those super aggressive. Oh, you're all the way back here, and then you're hacked, and then you're just
Right.
insta dead. You're playing up here, just contesting space, playing these corners, and then like if you start to get hacked, you turn corner, and if you are full hacked, that's when your supports can drop and put all the resources into keeping you alive. Farah, it's pretty obvious who the Farah counter is here. You put the Discord on her, you got McCree shooting at her. Even if you're not able to kill her as McCree, you're going to force her into really unfavorable angles. And then that whole point of having the Sombra Farah doesn't work anymore. The entire win condition of the Sombra Farah comp, it's usually ran with a helmet with a Hammond against goats, but regardless, the win condition is hack people and then charge up barrage. Your win condition there, if you get an EMP, it's going to be huge, but more often than not, you're playing it just to get the barrage. So in that case, you have the diva there to still contest her. You're not like running a Zarya and then you're completely helpless to the barrage, and you've got the McCree to instantly shoot her down. So it's not as big of a deal there, and you're still able to space the map a little bit where you're not just instantly charging up her ult 24/7 because you're able to play with a little bit of space spread out. So good against this comp. Genji Tracer, if they dive into you, same thing with like how you would stop a Sombra. You just have so much heals and so much burst with the discorded stun target into McCree and the hammer that they're not really able to get value out. Um, Comps that are good against this one, if you are playing it poorly, is that Widow comp where if they're able to say like get rid of this
If you're giving
Sombra,
the widow space,
yeah,
really.
if they get onto this widow and then they've pushed up on here because you've given them too much space because you're just playing for the counter dive, then you probably wouldn't have Farah here. Still, you'd have like a Genji.
Or wherever he is.
Yeah. So you've given up this much space now. This is where okay, Widow has complete sight lines. Like if she does, she can completely ignore tanks at this point. Now she's just looking onto that fight for McCree because now no one can contest her at this range. You're just kind of getting rolled. So Widow comp isn't automatically better than this. Like if your tanks are playing it how they're supposed to, um,
She
they're
shouldn't have the space to
yeah
set up.
they're playing around here. Your tanks are playing here. Even if their tanks are attempting to dive the back line specifically so that you counter dive, so that their Widow gets space, all you can do is ignore their tank dive. Your core lineup of 4 can deal with it themselves, and then, or you even send one back, and then have that one person to contest Widow. Now she's got no sight lines. Now that Widow is useless. You win the fight that way. Pretty typical why it, like we've explained why it's not good against goats. At that point, it's easier to run goats to try and beat that comp. But this comp is never ran with the intention of, okay, we're going to go this comp, and maybe if we shoot into Ryan's shield enough times, we'll be able to break it, and then we'll win.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have
If
that.
only
It's
it
not
works
its win
that
con.
way.
Just shoot their shield. It's that
Probably.
easy.
Just shoot it, forehead.
Yeah, I don't
Just-
like. I don't even understand why goats is meta. Like, just go Bastion, shoot the shield. God, no. So
that, dude.
rotations with this comp, it would almost always. Maybe you could sometimes have it start here. All with the McCree core. Tanks are always going to be playing upwards, usually at corners. You could play maybe around this corner. As you push farther back, you're going to be playing around this corner. But McCree isn't going or the McCree core isn't going to want to start here because you're just giving up so much space and you don't have, or not space rather, but they have so much space to take fights from. Like if they have that Widow or that Pharah, you're going to be at a really far range and you don't have sight lines onto not really their spawn, but the original cart position. So playing here is the most common spot, or something like you rotate between the two depending on as they've pushed in. Playing here gets you access or at least sight lines to this whole area. Even if you're not going to be getting picks onto people back there, but it still gives you that sight lines for the spam. And then when they forced a dive onto you, you can go back here behind the sign, so you're not getting hit by extra spam back here by like the enemy Ana, and then you're able to take that fight there, because in a close range fight, Zenyatta, Lucio, Brig, McCree is pretty scary. Rotation, so once you've fought here, if the fight is going on super long here, or it's towards the end of point, if you're able to rotate here, this is preferable. You still get sight lines onto this general area that's a really straight line, but you're also able to these are the type of angles that you want to be taking in any stall fight, where your tanks can fight on cart and then you've got someone back here who's able to apply damage. Because if they end up leaving
Apply damage to both them and the retreat route.
Yeah, if they end up just focusing on your tanks, well then your DPS are free to do whatever they want. If they try and draw attention, one, you lose pressure on the cart into that overtime stall, which is you don't really get a lot of free options to do that. And then two, your tanks instantly win the fight for whoever isn't there, and they can peel back if they need to. So this is super preferable once it's getting into that overtime stall. You can also have the McCree core playing here for the same general idea, although it's closer. And then if they're being pushed into a stall, everyone or the McCree core is just running back, you can play this high ground kind of near the spawn or on bridge, where you can still see, although it's more limited sight lines, but it's still a good split angle.
But you never want to drop.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to drop. Your entire power comes from, okay, we've got this good poke, we've got this good damage, and then if they come to us to stop us, they're screwing themselves. So if you're coming to them, you're doing exactly what they want.
Yeah.
That's a soft throw at that point.
Your, positioning and throwing away your win con, basically.
So looking on the second point, and I'm not doing this as an overview of how you would run it on Route 66, but an overview of how, okay, this is how you would run it on Route 66, now translate it to every map. Still tanks playing up here. You can play this corner for natural cover. You can play into here for just trying to maintain space for a short time, and then as they start to push you, there's going to be all these corners that you can play around. Typically, to start off, Kree comp is really not usually here because it's not much of a split angle, and it's still really close to them, so they can just push into you all super easily. But more so here, where if they plan to rotate through here, the Kree comp can meet or match them at that rotation, or they can rotate out, whatever they need to do. If they push under, you've still got that high ground space. If they do push that over, you can rotate however you want. Or if they push behind, which never happens.
When would you push in with that core?
If you've already got that advantage, you're pushing in, your tanks have just dived in now, they've picked off a Lucio or something, you can close that gap to get that. Because if, Brig is still going to be getting good brawl damage. It's not goats,
And
but if
McCree
Brig
can
is,
just,
if you're fanning the hammer with McCree, you're killing something. It's just how it is.
You never want to take an even fight there.
Yeah, you don't want to go out of your way to meet them there. In Goats v Goats, you're playing up here. If you see them pushing into here, you always meet. You only do that if you're at a strict advantage on Kree comp. You don't want to take a long fight there where, because we're at such long range and we're poking for so long now, we've kind of spent a little too much time and now they're charging up ults off of us.
So, if they have a like widow, would it be a good idea to take an early engage so she can't get around that like flank angle to like get the sight line?
It's not so much as you have to take an early engage, like you're playing back here, you see them pushing up through here, and you're like, okay, we have to go now to stop the widow from
Right.
setting up. It's more so
But
playing
explicitly with going up that top route.
going up this top route. Is the rest of her team following up here, or are they pushing through main?
I was like either way. It depends on like
If
I
they're
think that
pushing,
if it's just Widow, if it's just Widow, I think the McCree and Diva can just pressure alone. But if they're all just pushing through there, I think it'd probably be a good idea to just have like a full like commit.
yeah, I mean,
I don't know
if it's
a good idea or not.
just Widow here, you play it the same way how you've played it on
Yeah.
first. If it's just Widow back here because they forced a dive, you send your tanks up there, and then your core play the counter dive.
Yeah.
If they're sending the whole team through here, they've got their tanks set up here. Let me get these pictures. They've got their tanks set up through here. Oh my gosh, I really don't like how these are organized. They've got their tank set up through here, and then they've got their Widow setting up as well, whether it's here or able to rotate wherever. Your tanks aren't going to want to dive into that the same way where they didn't want to
They
dive
shouldn't into you.
yeah, at the beginning. So all you want to do there really is you can just force to pull back. Their Widow is going to, or not, that was a really bad arrow. You can just force the rotation back to around this corner where they don't have those great sight lines. Their Widow is going to want to rotate like around here or so. Then that's when your tanks can dive onto her.
Okay.
If you're forcing this dive really early on, all that's going to do is their tanks are just going to converge on yours,
Right.
and then it's going to be a 6v4, and then you've got no one to contest Widow. Like, you can give up cart space completely if you're going to guarantee that one fight, and them just being up here on their own isn't threatening. It's the threat of giving Widow space, but if you're able to rotate to get out of that space where that
So
Widow
we're
would
giving
have...
her space.
Yeah, at that point, it doesn't matter.
Gives you an advantage.
Like,
Basically.
once they've set up this space up here, it is 100% secure. Like, you can't contest that with just your dive
This is
tanks.
the kind of boat, the kind
Yeah.
of comp that contests that.
But as that happens, they're gonna want to push through to start taking more space for their Widow. But they're not gonna they're not gonna be able to play with that Widow the whole time. Like, tanks
they
aren't gonna
can't
be able
hard
to
engage like this.
play up here while their Widow is setting up
Yeah.
here. Like, so they're gonna end up having to rotate somewhere, and then when their Widow's alone, that's when your tanks dive in, and then that's when your core wins the counter dive.
Okay.
Going on to third, you would probably swap this comp, honestly. There's not a lot of teams that play dive on this point, and it's not really advantageous to play the counter dive here. That's kind of my general overview. So, I mean, this map, I tried to explain it, but for like the translation, it's always pretty much have
Use high
your
ground.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have your core on high ground where they kind of look like tasty to dive, right? Like if you're on Genji, you see like an Ana over here alone, and you're setting up here, you're gonna want to be like, okay, well, I'm just gonna dive on it, and then when you turn around and see her entire team hiding, you're not gonna have a good time.
Whoopsies.
So that's kind of like the general idea you want to have of tanks holding space wherever it's holding, and you want to have them holding space at safe angles, not taking hard dives, not committing too much to holding space. Like if they get low, you don't want to have them dying just for the sake of holding the space, because if your tanks are dead, then they're going to roll you in a 6v4. Like even if they're diving you that way, you're not going to survive that.
Positioning is more important than the space.
Yeah.
As weird as that sounds.
So
So,
important things with the yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so in that case, when like our tanks are taking space, would it be safe for them to take that little slope low ground, just to like be like completely safe, or could they just hop onto the bridge?
Like
Ramp or coast?
like
Like right by tunnel, like on the
Ramp.
so like in
Like
front
this?
of yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fine if it's like as you're rotating out, but if it's like early on, they're just gonna swap to a Widow, and then your tanks being here doesn't help your team at all. So it would have to be like
Okay.
they don't have a Widow, or if they do have a Widow, they're playing over here, and then from you being over here, your tanks can still get value off. But if you're playing this where they're still pushing up or something, or your team hasn't entirely rotated to like around a corner where they're safe, then playing at that angle is just gonna keep your like that's the type of thing where I'm talking about. You're playing for a counter dive, but you're not actually encouraging the enemy team to dive.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that was kind of one of the ideas I wanted to get at. General important points are like you want to have your DPS on a high ground, always, so that they're looking appetizing, appetizing, appealing to dive. Jeez, yeah, appealing to dive. And then where your tanks have an easy time counter diving. If you're just playing on low ground, enemy team is just gonna go goats and they'll just roll over you.
Yeah.
So you want to play in a way where it's not easy for them to contest your DPS without diving, but then if they do dive, they're not going to have an easy time either. Tanks, you want to make sure that they're playing in a way where they can control space, even if it's like not controlling like the whole map, but at least controlling some space, preventing setups during the staging phase, and then they can peel back when they need to. So the most important thing for tank play is making sure that they're not playing for the counter dive without encouraging the counter dive. So like yeah, what I was talking about, a 4.4k or 4.4 or 4.5, can't remember which. But like on Anubis, for example, he would be playing for the counter dive the entire time where like a DPS would play. But since he was Winston, all the enemy team did was just ignore him and push onto his team. You're not demanding space that way, and the only thing you need to be doing as a tank, or at least as a main tank, is demanding that space. So like if you're playing here, done nothing now. So you want to make sure that your tanks are playing in a way to encourage the like. That's what it's kind of a point that I always try to hammer home. In counter dive, you're playing counter dive to take advantage of the enemy team's mistakes. But if you're playing in a way where you take advantage of the enemy team's mistakes, but you're not forcing them into any mistakes, all that you're doing is you're hoping and praying that they're going to be so bad. Oh, hello? Hello?
Hi. Hello.
That was
Welcome back.
okay. What was the last thing you heard me say?
Give me a sec.
Monkey trying to play
yeah,
counter
Anubis.
dive on
Anubis.
Anubis.
Yeah. So what he would do
And then
was
just let the team roll over.
yeah. So the point that I really want to get at is when you're playing counter dive, your playstyle is taking advantage of the enemy team's mistakes. Like if they're making good dives, even if you counter dive them, it's not going to be useful. But what a lot of main tanks will do is they'll play to make or to take advantage of the enemy team's mistakes, but they're not forcing mistakes out of the enemy team. So their whole playstyle is, I hope and pray that the enemy team is going to make a mistake, and if they don't, well, then I've just effectively thrown. But if they do make a mistake, then I'm going to be really, really good. And when you're doing that, you're like, I mean, it can work.
I guess that'll work at like
Yeah, and like the lower ranks where mistakes are going to be plentiful, that's fine. But when you're getting into those higher ranks where they're going to see, okay, well, Monkey's back here. I don't really think we need to contest that Monkey. Let's just jump on these DPS. Then you're not going to be doing anything
Let's
effective.
just fucking take like
Yeah,
Wait,
let's
come
just let's just take space.
take all
So
the positioning you want.
when you're playing that counter dive, you really want to be playing in a way where you're forcing mistakes out of the enemy team. Like you're doing everything right so that no matter like like the enemy team doesn't have any mistake or any choice but to make a mistake. We're like, okay, if we play here, we're just gonna get poked at. So let's just dive the backline, I guess. And then once that's happened, that's when your team counter dives. So that would be like the big thing to hammer into your tanks' heads is you're playing this to force the enemy team into making mistakes, not to take advantage of mistakes. So the difference
You have
is
four people who are all ready to take advantage
Yeah,
of the mistakes.
the difference is creating it versus taking advantage of it, and you want to be creating it there because if you're creating it, you can do both. If you're only creating, or if you're only taking advantage of it, you're gonna get rolled if you're not. If the enemy team doesn't make those silly mistakes.
So basically, just stop playing like a bitch and like start being a bully.
Pretty much.
Basically.
But don't like over.
Yeah, don't like hard throw. Like don't go.
Yeah.
You know what I do? I see
You're
I
not-
see
you're
a
not diving into
Zenyatta
their
back here.
backline,
Let me go
yeah.
after him real quick.
Yeah,
like
not
that's
the kind
yeah.
of dive you're playing.
That's pretty much all I have. I didn't want to do a long time to do these. I typically try and keep VOD reviews kind of short too. I'm probably gonna do these often, or even if it's not like often, at least like once a month preferably. Get these uploaded for everyone to see because we're kind of dry on content right now. So if there's ever a time, and we'll probably still use this group chat. So if there's ever a time where it's like you see a comp and you just really want to go over it, don't be afraid to shoot a DM in the group chat. I mean, yeah, unless it's mine. I mean, just no leaks then. I mean, absolutely not. Other comps I'm still looking at, quad DPS, triple DPS. We would do those at the same time because they're just variants of each other. I don't want to do goats, man.
Yeah.
I don't want to go over goats. I mean, I think.
A million people have already like analyzed the shit out of goats.
And then what I might also do is like rotations, because I see a lot of teams that play goats just have awful rotations, and they just do it because they see pros do it and they don't really understand why they're doing it. So I might go over that as well. Like on this point, teams will hold close, and then, or teams won't even hold close. They'll just, but enemy teams will start to push up and force them behind. And that only really works for one specific reason, but teams do it for just every reason imaginable. So that would be like another thing I want to be doing. We'll probably keep everything to like this group chat since we already have it pre-made. So I'm gonna call it quits there. You all are free to go. If there's like any questions, you can ask me now. You can ask me later, whenever. We'll do these again.
I had a question about like choosing this comp. Is there where would you start on this composition? Like, aside from if you just know they're gonna go dive, like, is there any point where it's really safe to
on defense
start on this? Yeah,
100% playing on top of. Oh, I don't have my draw
Gas station.
tool. Yeah, on top of gas station.
Not. Sorry, I meant like as far as which maps. Sorry. Like
Roots. Well,
Maps
if
that have high ground.
yeah, Route 66. Possibly.
well, just like should you avoid it on like common goats maps and stuff? Is what I meant. Like
Probably. I mean, there's not a lot of teams right now where you can guarantee that they're
fair.
gonna be on dive.
yeah.
Maps where there are just kind of better comps, like even in dive on like Busan, like downtown, if they're playing like dive goats or like a widow variant, then you're not like even if you're controlling that space or everything, you're not gonna have an easy time.
You're not gonna contest that high ground.
Yeah.
Like,
So I use like I said I use Route 66 because it's just kind of good for everything. Like quad DPS is playable on this map. Protect the President, goats. That triple
normal
dive
ass
tank
dive.
comp that we run, that's viable here. So yeah, there's not really like a absolutely run it 100% on this map and never ever on this map. It's gonna kind of come down to how comfortable
Feeling it
is your team on it. How comfortable on the enemies on dive, like everything about that. So you can tweak it for your team a little.
yeah.
So is that all
like
we
I
got?
see this
Yeah.
mostly as like a counter swap to dive. or,
Yeah.
like, switching from goats to this, and like in response to like dive on certain points or whatever. So
All right, is that all?
that's all I can
Was
think of
this
for now.
recorded?
What? Yeah. Oh my God! Wait. Okay, it was.
Okay.
Oh. I didn't remember hitting my keybind. Oh my God. Oh. Every time I try and record something, that scares me. I was like, wait, did I press record? And then it's at the end of the session. I'm like, oh boy.
Okay.
So yeah, this will be uploaded on the Discord server because I know not a lot of people reacted to the ping, but the last time we did something live, a lot of people reacted. I kind of did this like really fast, like a 3-hour
on the
ping, and
fly.
then so we'll upload this for all of them. You can rewatch it, you can show it to players, whatever. I don't care. It's gonna be public for everyone to use.
My players.
Just tell them to stop being pussies. Just hold space a little, stop hiding. Yeah, we'll end it.